Hello, welcome to our next lesson on the Elizabethan England course. This lesson is going to be answering the question, why did Elizabeth want to colonise Virginia? Beginning to try and, I suppose, sow the seeds for the empire, the British Empire. What happens, what goes wrong, and we need to try and get our head around why it went wrong. Okay, so a nice topic, this one. A little bit of a standalone topic, especially following the challenges, shall we say, of the previous couple of lessons on the steps to war. That was quite tricky. This one is nice and easy. Okay, a nice little story as well. So let's get started. Okay, so had England fallen behind other countries is the question. We know that as we get into the 1700s, the British Empire is going to blossom into the biggest empire ever. But where we are right now in Elizabeth's reign, if you have a look at the information here, we can see some of these explorers in the previous century. Pizarro, Columbus, the most famous of all probably, Cabot, Cortez. Generally speaking, England has not really lit any fires as far as exploring the rest of the world goes until now. Okay, so we've obviously done a little bit of work already on why people might want to go exploring the markets, trying to compete with the economy, trade and routes, things like that. We've done that previously. We've met Drake. This is more so about setting up a colony, the beginnings of an empire, rather than just trying to set up new markets. All right, so I think it's very clear to see straight away from this that England has fallen behind other countries, definitely, and Elizabeth is keen to put that right. And we're going to start with trying to colonise Virginia. All right, so Virginia is England's first colony in the New World, the first part of what we're going to try and become or build parts of the country of America that we can make our own. It's obviously called Virginia for a reason, named after the Virgin Queen. Sir Walter Raleigh is going to name it as a nice little, I don't know, gift to the Queen. This new place they've established is going to be named after her. All right, so loads of reasons why it's going to fail. This lesson is really about understanding why it fails, what goes wrong, what decisions are made. It is only the first attempt of a proper colony, though. As we go into the 1600s, into the 17th century, especially in the Stuart period, it's very clear that England learns its mistakes. So also, as long as we are learning our mistakes along with Walter Raleigh in this lesson, we should be good to go. All right, so just thinking a little bit about what America looks like today, you will hopefully recognize that it's got 50 states. And if you just find Virginia on there, on the right-hand side in purple, pinky purple, that's where we're going to try and colonize. And if you look on that east coast of America, you'll recognize some of those places. But also as we go through the United States, as the Europeans moved west, you'll recognize lots of places in America that are named after towns, even tiny villages in England, from the people who moved from the villages in England to America for their fame and their fortune. All right, so we're just going to concentrate on that tiny little bit of America there, Virginia, before we think about the bigger picture of moving west. This is the story of the American Indians as well, the Native American Indians who generally get pushed off their land as the expansion goes across in the 1800s, and America becomes the superpower that it is today. All right, so let's think about the questions first, nice and easy. Why did Elizabeth want to colonise Virginia? So there's loads of reasons for this, so we'll start with perhaps just the overall point being empire and politics. If it's a 12 marker, it'd be a bit of a tricky 12 marker really, as far as maybe getting 2 pages of detail down. But empire and politics, you want to think about Virginia is close enough to Florida and the Caribbean, but far enough from Spanish colonies to be safe maybe. So we can start building this empire relatively safely in the idea that we're not going to be getting on Philip's nerves too much. Close enough though to those key areas, especially the Caribbean, as the slave trade develops in the 1700s. The Caribbean obviously becomes quite an important part of that. It's also a good example to encourage further colonisation in the New World. If this goes well, then we'll get hopefully more people willing and wanting to take the risk and move across to America. Obviously, life is hard at home, isn't it, in England, especially if you're a peasant. But even so, generally, religious reasons, there's lots of reasons why you might want to leave. So if we can get this one right, then it might encourage people to come later on. Also, to try and rival the Spanish Empire, it would be take another 200 years probably for our empire to get to its height, you know, the British Empire that we've talked lots about. But a good place to start would be the Americas North America, essentially, more so, as we know that Philip has generally got control of South America. So that might be one overall maybe reason or paragraph why people might want to colonize Virginia. So another one might be to compete with Spain politically, undermine Spain's influence in the New World, obviously in the Americas with South America and the Caribbean. Philip has the monopoly. We obviously need a license, remember, to do trade deals there. He basically controls everything. So by us setting up our own little colonies, it might start a bit of competition. It also means that where Spain are offering, maybe they're being bad to the Indians, they're killing the Indians or whatever, then England could sell itself perhaps as less aggressive, as nicer, as kinder to the Indians. I don't know, all sorts of things like that. But anyway, just try and undermine the Spanish influence. As I've said, we might be able to offer some of those Native American Indians an alternative to this Spanish domination, and hopefully they will trade with English settlers instead of the Spanish. All again really politically, but just trying to compete with Spain, and also having a base in the New World where we can attack Spanish colonies. We've talked about Drake at length and Drake's sort of actions in the New World, attacking Spanish colonies and Spanish ships. If we have a little base out there, it would make it a whole lot easier, wouldn't it, to attack. And instead of trying to get back to England, we just go back to our colony or colonies. So there's definitely a quite obvious political reason why we might want to do this. Also, again, probably the most obvious reason is economy, trade. Everything through Antwerp is risky, isn't it? We're trying to get these trade and ports to the east of the world, so it makes sense to try and open up some trade and ports in the west as well. So trade is obviously vital to the English economy, as it is to every country's economy. So any new markets are always good, especially as Spain, as we know, are making it very difficult in Antwerp in the Netherlands with their conquest of the Netherlands. It's also going to be a base for privateering, so not necessarily just to attack Spanish ships and colonies, but also to have a bit of a base for setting up trading ports or just areas that we can directly compete with Spain in. Also, depending if we can get some good bits in certain parts of America where the weather's better, we can bring some herbs. Obviously, we want to be getting those cotton plantations in our mind for the future. That's what develops, isn't it? And so forth. So another base, just to maybe organise the privateering, trading. All right. Obviously, we know that tobacco and sugar is going to be really popular. It becomes a massive import from the Americas, and obviously Virginia in particular. There's obviously a reason why we went to Virginia first. When we did the Drake lesson, hopefully you remember that they spent a long time in the 70s just sort of scouting, if you want. If that kind of makes sense. They went out there, they got loads of information about America, where's good to go, where's not so good to go, and they've settled on the first colony being Virginia based on the information that they took home, the considerations, maybe the friendliness of the locals, so things like that. So that's why they've gone to Virginia first, and obviously Virginia is on the east coast, so it's closer to England than if they went to the west coast, over towards California. Okay, so in exam mode, let's, as always, try to consider these lessons in the context of what it looks like in an exam. So if this was a 16 marker, it would give us our statement, remember, where it'll say one reason in particular is the reason why we went to colonize Virginia. So this is saying the main reason that voyages of exploration were undertaken during Elizabeth's reign was to increase England's wealth. And it says you can have that one, or Anglo-Spanish relations, so this idea about competing, even trying to undermine Spain, and then developing trade is obviously another one we could pick. This is quite a tricky question, really. There's better ones. A nicer one might be explain or sort of giving you a statement as to why the expedition to Virginia failed, which by the end of this lesson you'll be able to answer that. But definitely it's doable still. So it's the statement, and then obviously in these three paragraphs you're going to be saying why one of those is more important, or whether you agree or not that it was to increase wealth. I think it probably was in the end, wasn't it? But the problem there is wealth and trade are quite similar, so it's quite a tricky question, this one. But you could also include these as other bullet points. To increase England's wealth is obviously the thing. Retaliation, provocation, and to undermine Spain's power would be quite a nice one, so you'd be able to bring in some of Drake's actions there. Develop these trade routes, talk about the difficulties with Antwerp and Spain and the Netherlands, all the political reasons we talked about at the start of this lesson, and to compete, as well as a base of privateering. So it's doable, certainly, but this is quite a difficult question if they asked us this. If it's a 12 marker, it would obviously be a little bit easier. Again, the same paragraphs, the same crutch of the question and the answer, it would just say explain why there were voyages of exploration. We've talked about that already, haven't we, in that lesson, looking at adventure, better maps and make it possible, things like that. So this is as hard as it gets, and hopefully at the end of this lesson we'll be able to have a go at a question like this, but there's certainly easier questions, particularly when we're thinking about why this first colonisation failed. Okay, so firstly, before we get into this lesson, let's understand who Sir Walter Raleigh is. So we've spent loads of time with Drake, we understand who Hawkins is, so Raleigh is equally as important as those two. Less of a pirate, I'd say Walter Raleigh was, more of a colonist. He's going to be someone who is going to be more setting up this new empire, or the roots of the new empire. So firstly, he's very rich and influential. He's a member of the gentry, so he's got contacts, he's got money, he's got power. He's an explorer and he's a courtier, so he spends a lot of time at court. Obviously, he's one of those guys that we previously talked about who would try and drum up some money for his ventures and also maybe invest in other people's adventures. But generally speaking, he's one of the ones, again, that the courtiers would go to for confidence that they would definitely get a return on their money. He's one of Elizabeth's favourites as she's getting older. He is definitely one who rises to favour. And he is what sort of famous for really popularising tobacco and potatoes. I think he gets the credit really for bringing the potato back to England, or introducing the potato to England. So that's one of those little maybe pub quiz questions. Whether it's entirely true or not is probably up for debate. But generally, I think Walter Raleigh goes down as in history as the one who introduced the potato to England. And in 1584, remember, as this is a period of real high tension for Elizabeth with the Treaty of Joinville and all sorts of other stuff going on, Elizabeth gives him a patent. In other words, gives him permission to go and explore and settle lands in North America in her name. All right. Again, when we're thinking about who's to blame for these tensions that arise leading to the Spanish Armada, this is possibly another one of those little examples you could probably pick that she knows that this is going to upset Philip, especially if he does it in Spanish kind of areas. So anyway, she's given him permission and encouraged him to go out there and set up English colonies. Okay, so Raleigh has to persuade other colonists to invest and join him in this. You obviously can't go to a new country and set up a whole new colony with about 10 people. So it's a bit more complicated than just going. He's got to try and get people to go with him. But also there's some negative rumours. We talked, didn't we, a little bit in the previous lessons about how people were excited about some of the stories of the New World. But there are also some negatives, some rumours of monsters and things like that, and evil Indians and all that kind of stuff. So he's got a bit of a job of persuading people to go. So his significance, before we get into the Roanoke or Virginia story, he's investigated, organised and funded the establishment of Virginia. That's him. So Virginia is all on him. It's his money generally, and obviously he's given it the name Virginia after the Virgin Queen. He's going to rule Virginia as the governor. All right, so if you know anything about American politics today, you'll know that every state has a governor, essentially the person in charge of their state. And he's going to create the blueprint to be used for all future English colonizations. So we end up colonizing loads of America, as I'm sure you know, and the same blueprint is generally used, also building on the mistakes that Raleigh's going to make in this first one. All right, some of it is fault, some are not so much his fault. So let's think about the situation before we actually go. We need to raise funds. So very similar to that previous lesson on exploration, we need to raise funds, generally from the courtiers, from the nobility. Obviously, they're going to be wanting some sort of money back. But in this case, in this lesson, we are asking people to come with us to start a whole new life, fully of the intention that they will never come home again. So how does Raleigh persuade people to invest in this Virginia project? So firstly, although Elizabeth wouldn't pay for the whole voyage, he gets this royal backing from the Queen. Obviously, now that the Queen has given him royal backing, it also legitimises the whole venture, which also might encourage more investors because it's not a random. The Queen has set this one up. She gives him a ship and some gunpowder. So really, when he goes around the court saying, oh no, this is really cool, it'll be fine, the Queen's given us money and ships and stuff, this is a real deal, come on, get involved, people are more likely to get involved. He also appoints leaders for the expedition and a governor for the new colony. So it's properly appearing to be really serious. Like, people will have serious jobs out there. So it's not just a free-for-all. And then the 1584 expedition, he brings back 2 American Indians, and we'll talk about them shortly. But they sort of bring the language over with them. This Algonquin is the tribe's name. So they're starting to create a bit of a dictionary and a way to communicate for the colonists. So when they come, they already know some of the language that will help them speak to the Native Americans that they will meet when they get there. So that's quite a smart thing for Raleigh to do, just to try and make people feel a bit more comfortable. He's also invested a lot of his own money, as we've said, in this expedition. This makes others believe that it could work, because obviously, why would you throw all your money into something that isn't probably going to work? And as it's his own money, that encourages people to give them some money. He sends a fact-finding mission to Virginia in 1584, which reports back that there are friendly American Indians, loads of money, silver, gold, all sorts of things out there. Investors are like, ooh, ka-ching, and they sign up for the thought of that. And then finally, Walter Raleigh promises to capture any Spanish ships the expedition comes across and steal any of their valuable cargoes as well. So in the conversations that you can imagine Raleigh's having at the court with all these nobles and high up people, this sounds like win-win, nothing to lose. The possible scariest thing ever is the Spanish, but even that, Raleigh's promising that he's going to take their stuff. Some other ways to make some money on this is to barter with the natives. So to basically negotiate, take some things from England and trade with them, things they've probably never seen, like, I don't know, pots and pans. We could also provide work for the cloth makers, who could then supply the colony out there. So they've got a little link at home. That could be a good way to make some money. Gold and tobacco made by the colony could be sold in England. So that's another way of making some money, is you essentially have a little shop, a deal, a trade post back home for the goods from just Virginia. So that might help people invest in that. And then these Indians, the Algonquin Indians. So let's take our time to think a little bit about the importance of these. Now, when we get to their land, it's theirs because they were there first. This is also one of those areas where in the world we live in now, and probably rightly so, using the term the New World is not really appropriate anymore. We should really be trying to say the Americas, I guess, because it's not new. There was a world there and there was people living there before. So the reason why we're going to take some time just to stop now and think about the Algonquin Indians is just in case you see a bullet point in an exam question that mentions the Algonquins and you panic and you think, what on earth are the Algonquins? It just means the Indians, the local Indians that we meet when we get to Virginia. Okay, we will meet two of them in particular shortly. As we've obviously mentioned already, they help do this dictionary and this language, just so we've got some way of communicating with them when we get over to the New World. So let's have a little venture then as we start building up how this is going to happen. Okay, so if you have a look at the information on the screen now, plan. Just stop this, pause the video and just go away and sort of plan how you might set up this colony. All right, if we were doing this in school, I would ask you to do the plans first without seeing the who, supplies, when, ships and other bits. But as we're watching this at home, it's probably a bit easier if you just look at the information there, how Raleigh's going to set this colony up. What do you need to consider? What's important? Who you're taking? When are you going? Obviously, that will be important for when you plant your seeds. Will they grow in time to eat? How many ships? How many supplies? What other considerations might you need to think about? And try and put together like a formalised plan in your notes, in your book, however you're doing this, using all of the information on the screen right now to come up with a foolproof plan to make this colony work. Okay. Try to remember as well that you want male and female animals so they can breed. Little things like that are what makes this task kind of fun, interesting, but also you are absolutely doing what Walter Raleigh would have had to have done. All right. Remember to consider that you might come up against some Spanish opposition. You might see some Spanish pirates. All of these things, make sure you consider them, but use the information on the screen as well. When you're ready, when you've done that and you've done your little plan, come back to the video and press play and we'll carry on. All right, so some things to think about to secure your knowledge, hopefully, that you just considered whilst doing that little task is, first of all, he's going to ask, how will you pay for the colony? So we've got a couple of reasons there. We've kind of mentioned that already. I'm not going to read through all of these as you're watching this video. Just pause the video to read them yourself, but we've kind of already mentioned them and you've just done this in your previous task. This just adds a bit more detail and secures that knowledge if we need to go forward in any sort of question that asks about Virginia. How does he persuade people to go? As we've mentioned, he needs so many people to set this thing up, and we've talked about the persuasion as well in the previous couple of slides. Who should lead the colony? He needs brave and intelligent people. Obviously, that goes without saying. And he needs people he can trust to run this colony. What kind of food and supplies will we need? Hopefully, you've considered that in your previous task. all of the things there to think about. And then how should we treat the Indians when we get there, the Native American Indians? Roanoke is already full of Native American Indians, as are many of the areas of America. So those are things you need to think about too. So just pause this, and even so, if there's anything new on this screen, add it to your little plan from the last little task, and just really get this idea about how you do it secure in your mind. And now we'll have a little look at the solutions that Raleigh did. Same kind of thing, add to your plans if you need to, but the solutions to his questions are right there. Persuade English merchants, we've talked about that already. Drake's actions, we've already mentioned how that increases the likelihood of getting more people investing. How does he persuade people to go? I guess promising the world. The Queen has given them powers and gunpowder and a ship. Who should lead the colony? Obviously those discussions. We'll look in this lesson in a bit more detail at Grenville and Lane. And what food and supplies will be needed? Obviously we need to decide when to go in order to be able to sow our seeds, in order to be able to eat as the winter months come in. But there's a lot of information there on this number 4 box. Again, make sure you've considered that in your previous task, and just to secure the plans for your colonization. And then finally, the solution to the Indians is, as we know, we need to make sure that we're strict, I guess, severe to anyone who doesn't particularly aren't nice or welcoming. But we also want to try and have some sort of positive relations as well. So again, pause this screen, have a good read of those things, do what you want with them really. They could, I guess, go in your plan and task, or just make some summary notes about how Raleigh's solutions have solved the problems that he had. Overall, I feel like this task is definitely left us quite secure in our knowledge of how's he going to do it, how's it going to work, what problems is he going to face, and what is his solutions. Okay, so that's the easy bit really of this lesson. You'll see as we go through the rest of the lesson that this first attempt at colonization in Virginia did not go particularly well. So with that said, let's move on to the story. So this is the route that Sir Walter Raleigh is going to take to Virginia. So quite a long journey to get from England to Virginia, but remember we're using our astrolabe and our other technology. We've got our Mercator maps, all those things we previously talked about, so we can see the route that we're taking, and as well as the challenges really, would be we're going close to Spanish waters there, aren't we, as we get over to the Americas. So we've got to consider the likelihood that we'll bump into some Spanish pirates. Alright, now this is just a nice thing for you to do really. Just pause the video and have a little read of this story. It's a bit more of a sort of kiddie thing, but it gives you the idea of the story. There's a nice little bit, that's not nice at all really, but there's a little bit in there that talks about how it was so hot that they went for a swim and one of the colonists lost their leg because a shark attacked them. We shouldn't be laughing at such things, but these are the bits of the story that you can just add for your own. None of this on this screen is particularly for our exam, just a little bit of depth really to the journey that Raleigh and his colonists took to get to Virginia and Roanoke Island. Okay, so let's move on then to these two. We've mentioned the Indians already, so Manteo and Wanchese. Obviously this is not Manteo and Wanchese, it's a modern photograph, but obviously they are acting as the two Algonquin Indians. So 2 Native American Indians were brought back to England, and they helped this dictionary that we've talked about. This would prove useful when trying to colonize Virginia, because when we meet them, when the new colonists arrive in Virginia, we can communicate at least as a basic level. I suppose a bit like if you went abroad on holiday, it'd be much more helpful, wouldn't it, if you could have a basic sort of hello, how are you kind of thing. So also with these guys, we take tin utensils, metal knives, fish, nuts and fruits and vegetables. We're going to barter this with the Indians when we get there. And then it's important to understand that the reports that we send back to England of this idyllic, perfect paradise, and that the Indians are also friendly and welcoming. All of this, along with the promises of riches and all kind of adventures, why people signed up to come over to colonize Virginia with Sir Walter Raleigh. All sounds lovely in practice, doesn't it? All right. So how successful was the Virginia colonization? So we're going to start with Roanoke Island, which is basically where we're going to start our attempt to colonize the state of Virginia. So in the end, Raleigh only managed to get 107 colonists, despite the 300 he'd hoped for, and probably hoped for a bit more than that as well. All of them were men, and there was some thought process to that, in that the men wouldn't be distracted by women if women came along. But ultimately, that's what he's got, 107 men. Secondly, half of them were soldiers. Brilliant if you're in a war or fighting. There's some landowners, some farmers, and some skilled craftsmen, as well as some mathematicians who are there for the promise of all sorts of riches and fortunes. But soldiers are one thing, being able to build a whole colony, build villages and towns and buildings, not necessarily the best mix of people, for sure. So that might be a reason that we'll talk about as well shortly. So just pause this video and just write a little summary really from the information on the screen. Why do you think overall this is going to be a problem for the new colony? What problems do you predict is going to happen as we go through the rest of this lesson? And we'll see if you are correct, okay? So when you're ready, unpause and we'll carry on. So this is the story of our journey. 5 ships were sent. They are called the Tiger, the Roebuck, the Lion, Dorothy and Elizabeth. Obviously there's Elizabeth in there, anything to feed her ego. So these are the 5 ships that have got our colonists, our animals, our food, our grains, and everything we're going to need to set up a colony in Virginia. 5 ships with everyone's dreams on it. The Tiger is the biggest and carries all of the perishable goods, the meats, the vegetables, the beer, the wine, the seeds and the grain. The things that are important, but the things that can go off quickly. So the Tiger probably straight away you might be thinking is the most important ship out of all 5, as without any of that food this colony is not going to last very long at all. Alright, on the 9th of April 1585, it's already too late for planting their crops when they arrived, so there's a problem straight away. They got there too late. They should have set off earlier, because now when you put the seeds in the ground they're not going to grow. Maybe it's too hot. It's getting too hot in this period towards the summer. They've missed the spring, haven't they? So we've got a problem in growing foods and crops for later in the year. Keep that in mind as we go through this lesson, especially as we consider why it failed. The English have landed on Roanoke Island in 1585, and that's where we're going to begin our settling. A nice little island. What could possibly go wrong? We're surrounded by water. Maybe we could fish. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see as this thing goes on. And then Walter Raleigh, and this is really important, was not allowed to go. Due to him being the Queen's favourite at the time, she needed him at home because of the tensions with Spain. Obviously, we've just had the Treaty of Joinville, and by April of 1585, we're getting close to needing to sign the Treaty of Nonsuch. Relations are really strained with the Spanish. War is now inevitable. In fact, it's almost guaranteed. And we're at war with Spain, to be fair. So she won't let Raleigh go. Now, he is the one who's designed the colony, planned it all. He's the one who knows everything inside out and backwards. So with him not being there, that probably means it's not going to be quite as successful. So all together, thinking about that, add to the previous little paragraph you did from the last slide, predicting the problems. Why do you think all of this might have led to a bit of a failure of the colony? And then we'll carry on, considering who will go instead of Raleigh. Okay, so if Raleigh's not going to run the show, who is he going to send instead? Okay, let's go. So Richard Grenville is the guy chosen to go. He is the expedition commander. You can see he looks kind of powerful in his painting. He's obviously really experienced as a sailor and a soldier, and he's quite he takes risks, shall we say. This is a guy who's not particularly cautious in what he does, and he doesn't get on really well with Ralph Lane. You'll see Ralph Lane in a sec. So you've got the commander and the guy who's going to be the governor, because Raleigh's not going, not getting on. Straight away, there's a red flag there. Alarm bells should be ringing that this colony is in danger from the very beginning because of the people who are in charge of it. So Grenville is going to lead the expedition, but he's not going to get on well with Ralph Lane. And here's Ralph Lane. He is going to be the governor of Virginia, essentially the boss of Virginia. So although Grenville's in charge of the expedition, the journey, when we get there, Ralph Lane is going to be the boss. He's an expert fort builder. That's going to be really useful, especially when we're trying to build forts that might keep out the enemies, enemy Indians perhaps. He's an explorer and a soldier, and he's got a really positive can-do attitude. So obviously, hopefully you can see why Walter Raleigh picked him to be the governor. All right, and then Thomas Harriot is the third sort of leader, if you like. He is a translator and a cartographer, so he draws maps. So he's obviously going to map out when we get there where the villages will be, towns, churches, whatever it is that they're going to build. Thomas Harriot's quite important as well. He can speak the native Algonquin language, so he is the one who is directly going to be speaking to the natives. He understands navigation more than anybody, and he's really, really skilled at maps. So we've got these 3 people in charge of the expedition and 103 other colonists, all men, some soldiers, some mathematicians. you've got a bit of a mix, but it doesn't seem like at the moment you've got a perfect mix of skills, okay? And we'll see that as we go forward in the rest of this lesson. So let's think about this next bit, and this is the bit that's really good about this lesson, and it's quite fun. It's interesting. Why does it fail? So plan and why it failed. The image on the screen are 4 reasons why it failed, 4 paragraphs. Now remember, we'll only ever need 3. If it's a 12 marker, explain why the Roanoke, the Virginia colony failed. If it's a 16 marker, it will give you a statement. It will say probably the journey or the colonists or whatever. Do you agree? So you can see some details straight away. So it might be useful if you maybe copy this little diagram into your book or your notes, wherever you do in your notes watching this video, and add to it the details as we go through the next few slides on this lesson. All right, but generally speaking, the main reasons why it fails are the voyage, the journey, the colonists, the people who went, inexperience, and the Indians. The Indians are going to prove to be a problem, even though reports have said, haven't they, that the Indians are going to be kind and welcoming. All right, so let's go through the next bit of this lesson, and it's essentially going to add the detail to each of these green circles. So when you're ready, once you've drawn that up and you want to add to your notes or just do bullet points, is entirely up to you. So firstly, why it failed. Reason one to think about is that there was 2 attempts at colonising Virginia. Both have failed. There's the second one, which we'll look at the end of this lesson, is still a mystery, a massive history mystery. No one knows at all what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke. Really, really excellently interesting, fascinating story, but also quite tragic at the potential of what you think might have happened. So reason 1 then, paragraph 1, explain why the expedition failed, the voyage itself. So firstly, we're going to introduce the idea that we've already mentioned. They left too late to plant the crops. That means in those later months of the year, they're going to start getting hungry, and they're obviously relying on then getting food from somewhere else because they just left too late. Secondly, a lot of the 106 colonists arrived ill from the journey. When they get there, it's going to be too hot. They're going to get bit. It's going to be just horrible. So they're not really in a position to start building towns and forts and houses. The climate is humid, mosquitoes are everywhere. Obviously, they don't know what it's like because these people have only joined this expedition based on reports and things that people have told them. Then they actually get there, they realise it's too hot, sticky. I guess you might know that if you go on holiday sometimes. Some of you might love the heat, some of you might hate the heat. So the food that they had rotted much quicker because of the heat. Not helpful when you haven't got enough seeds and things to plant anyway. And then to make that even worse, the Tiger, the ship with all of the food on, was damaged, crashed, and all the food, all the seeds, everything just floated away. So straight away, the voyage, the journey, it needs to be perfect to really stand the chance of this thing working. And everything that could go wrong in the voyage definitely seems to have gone wrong. So any hope of establishing a self-sufficient colony is gone. That means they're going to have to now rely on something else or somebody else. Probably that's going to be the Indians. And if no Indians, then I guess they're just going to have to go home. All right. So that is where we'll be at the first bit of this paragraph. It might be useful for you to write a paragraph, imagining it was a 12 marker. So one reason why the colonization of Virginia failed was the voyage. There's your lovely point. And then get some of this detail into a paragraph saying why this meant they failed. Okay. Ultimately, they were starving. They had to go home because they had no food. Okay. Luckily, though, the Indians did feed them at first, but we'll see that that does not last very long. So let's move on to the second reason why it failed. The expectation versus the reality. What they dreamed of going to, what they thought they were going to get when they got there, the reality was very, very different. Apart from it being too hot and humid and mosquitoes, the hope of getting rich quick was clearly not happening. There would need to be a lot of work first. I think they expected they were going to just get there and be rich straight away. All the hard work was needed by all of the colonists to set up and establish it. The merchants and the gentlemen, so the higher ups of society really, those who were higher up in England, they had no intentions of building things when they got here. They expected the poor would do all the work for them, or the Indians would do all the work for them, and the Indians are definitely not going to be doing that, and neither are the workers. The poor people who are on this expedition, they're there to better their lives, aren't they? They've been promised their own land, not to be, again, working for rich people. They'd have stayed at home if they wanted that, wouldn't they? So that's a bit of a problem there straight away. They also found themselves foraging for nuts and berries in the winter, just looking for any old food. That is not what they expected was going to be happening. They were promised the world, and here they are scurrying through the forest looking for nuts and berries that have fallen off the trees. Really, really rough. And that's obviously because they have no food themselves due to the fact that the Tiger, the ship, sank. The colonists also hated each other. The farmers refused to do the farming for the upper classes, similarly to the builders. They came here to work on their own lands. So just awful. Now you're hoping that Ralph Lane is going to be able to sort all this out, but evidently he's failing and he's struggling because he probably hates them as much as the colonists hate him. Also, as we've mentioned before, the amount of soldiers on the expedition is great for a fight, but not for a farm. They're ill-disciplined, they're getting angry, they're getting fed up. One soldier at least one was executed, and his body was left to rot as a warning. So you can imagine what the Indians are thinking when they see this kind of thing in the land from these white people who've arrived. But also, it's just starting to fall apart, isn't it? The whole thing is falling apart. They've gone there for this new life, excited, and already it's starting to fall down. People are getting executed, bodies hanging. It just sounds like being back at home, really, doesn't it? So there's too many craftsmen, not enough farmers, so they can make stuff. But obviously, that you need farmers, don't you, to farm the land, to get the supplies. There isn't any stone, so any forts that they plan to build have to be made out of wood. Now, that's dangerous because you can set it on fire. Enemies can set it on fire easily. And you maybe have some stonemasons who are sort of now clueless in what to do with wood. Just everything went wrong. So this is another nice, easy paragraph, I think you agree, hopefully you agree, as to why the expedition failed. Expectation versus reality. So again, maybe write this up as a little paragraph as you watch this lesson, and then we will move on to reason 3, paragraph 3 of why it failed. Nice and simple, the Indians themselves. So it all started off really well. Manteo, Wanchese, they've been to England, they've met people, they've taught people the language, all was going really well. The Indians were providing food for the colonists, the Algonquin tribe. So we need to meet now the local chief, Wingina, or Wingina, ruled Roanoke Island. He was there first. He is the leader of the Native American Indians, of the Algonquin tribe. He's unpredictable and he's suspicious of the English. He's suspicious because lots of Indians started to die when the English came, and they believed that the English had special powers, magic powers, and they just sort of looked at the Indians and they died. So they became really suspicious of them. The reality is that the English just brought our common colds with us, our common illnesses with us, and the Indians weren't used to them. Their immune system wasn't used to them, so that's what killed them. But you can see totally why the chief Wingina was a bit concerned. So he turned against the English eventually because of the demand. We were demanding that they feed us. It was one thing giving them food at the start, but then it became very aggressive, and the English was just sort of getting really hostile to demand that they provide food for us. As we've mentioned, the supernatural powers, that he believed they were going to be here to try and destroy the Indians. So tensions are rising even with this relatively friendly tribe. There's violent clashes between the natives and the English because of these handouts, also because of the desperation of the colonists. So they were really desperate, and obviously, I guess you could say an entitlement maybe, I don't know, but they started really pushing this relationship with the Indians, and that's not going to end well. So then by the spring of 86, Wingina has asked other chiefs to join him and attack the English. Now, obviously by this point, we would hope to be starting to be building stone forts. As it is, we've got wooden forts, we've fallen apart with each other, we hate each other. So this is really, the English are not in any particular state to really hold off an attack from a load of Indian tribes. So Wingina does this, he asks for this to attack the English. They're starting to be really hungry now, so the end is nigh. They are essentially soon going to be getting ready to leave. Ralph Lane then finds out about this, and he has Wingina killed. So everything that we planned, we were going to work with these American Indians, the natives, they were friendly. We've ended up within a year of killing the chief Indian, starving, falling out with each other. All of it is a reason why we fail. So Lane and the remaining colonists abandon Virginia. They just go home in July of 1586, and that's the end of that. So the first 3 paragraphs are really, really easy. Just make sure that you take the time in this lesson just to pause the video and go away and write this paragraph, just so you've had the practice, and then you've now got 3 paragraphs for the 12 marker, done and dusted. Just by thinking about them as you go. Obviously, the name of the game is to know it off by heart for exam time, but some really, really cool stories that will help this be quite an easy question if we get it. Then, so the 12 marker, as we've said, explain why the attempt to colonise Virginia was a failure. The 2 bullet points they've offered in this is the colonists themselves, Windjammer, the Indian chief, and the yellow box gives you all the other possible things that you might talk about. This would be an absolutely stunning 12 marker if we can get this in our exam. But just make sure you practice this as a question, either in your practice question booklets or just in your notes during this lesson as you watch it. A nice topic. Obviously, if it was a 16 marker, it might say the colonists was the main reason why the colonisation of Virginia failed. How far do you agree? Paragraph 1 will have to be about the colonists, and then you pick 2 others. Make sure your judgment is in there. How far do you agree with that to a larger or lesser extent? But as a 12 marker, definitely much more straightforward. Okay, so that's the gist of it. So far in this 40 minutes of this lesson, so we've figured out why they went, how they went, and what happened. And more importantly, we spent a fair bit of time discussing why it failed. Just make sure you're really confident on why it failed. Okay, and then this last little bit to tag on to this lesson really is the second attempted colonisation of Virginia. So it's a bit later on in the course. It probably comes just a bit after our course ends. So the likelihood of being asked a question about it, in theory, shouldn't happen because our course only goes up to 88. However, it sort of goes over the end of the course a little bit, so you might. So the first one failed, an absolute disaster, but good old British spirit, English spirit, they went and tried again. So despite the failings of the first one, they tried again a year later. This would be the beginnings of one of the most famous mysteries in English history. What has happened to the Roanoke second colonists? Good on them for going and trying again, really. Hopefully they've learned the lessons from the first one, when they leave, who they take with them, maybe trying to improve relations with the Indians a little bit. As it is, they just disappeared. So some basics for it here, really. This source is a painting of one of the Indian settlements in Virginia around about 1590, painted by a guy called John White. He was sent by Raleigh to paint, to I guess, present what our colony could look like, or does look like, or what the tribes look like. So let's have a little bit of a delve into the second attempt. And maybe you might want to take this further just out of your own interest. I've certainly looked at this over the years. There is no answer. There's just no answer to where the colonists went. They would just disappeared. Nothing ever found of them to this very day. All right, so the gist of the story is this time they took 17 women with them. So they had families on board. So there's a whole different context of the colonists now. Many of them come from the poorer areas of London, so they're used to hard work. They're used to hardship. So this is no difficult for them, no difference for them. Obviously a little bit hotter. I feel like they've been well and truly briefed on what it's like from the failed colonists before. So they are going into this eyes wide open. Each of them was guaranteed a massive 500 acres of land to farm. That's the pull factor. That's what they've been offered in order to get them to go. Raleigh has made Manteo, one of the Indians, the Lord of Roanoke. This is obviously a really clever thing to do. This is going to try and mend some of those relations with the Indians from the previous attempt. Is Manteo is going to be basically in charge of Roanoke. He can work as a sort of in-betweener between the Indians and the English. All right, I feel like that's a clever thing to do. John White this time is put in overall charge. He'd survived the first colony, so he knows what to expect. So he's quite brave enough to go back as well. His advisor has been found dead, though, when he gets there. 16 arrows through him. So the beginnings of the second one is a bit of a warning there. 16 arrow wounds. Quite a way to die. So straight away, there's tension. They're already facing some resistance from the Indians. But to be fair, following what happened the last time, that's probably understandable. This is where perhaps Manteo needs to do some work to restore relations. So White is then summoned home to explain to Raleigh what's happened. He left his wife and his daughter out there, expecting to be back soon enough. But because the Spanish Armada then came, White didn't make it back to Roanoke until 1590. So there's a period of time here where White, the leader, is stuck in England fighting the Armada or supporting with the Armada, leaving his family and the other colonists out there. Who knows what's going on really, but without him there, and also this idea about there's some tension from the Indians, well, we'll see where this ends. So when he does finally go back, and this is the sad bit really, if it is, it's awful actually, because they're human beings in here, aren't they? When he goes back, there's no trace of the settlement, none of the colonists, including his wife and his daughter. There is absolutely nothing, nothing at all, no clues, no nothing on where they went, except a report that there was a carving in a tree saying Croatoan, which was one of the local tribes, Indian tribes. So there's a suggestion, I suppose, if anyone wants to put their money on what's happened there, probably they're going to put their money on that it was that tribe that took them. But even still, where's the bodies? There must be something left that make this history mystery one that people are fascinated with today. And maybe one that you want to go away and just try and look at yourself. There's loads of stuff on the internet about this, loads of YouTube videos about what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke. So overall, the second colony once again has failed. This time we're not really sure why or how. And it won't be again until into the Stuart period, really, under King James, where they then attempt a colonisation of a place called Jamestown, which is also in Virginia, just a little bit further around the coast. And it's much, much more successful, is the Jamestown colony. But they've obviously learned a lot of valuable lessons from Raleigh and White's attempts. So that's quite a sad story, really, quite a way to end this lesson as well. So quite a nice little exercise for you to do for revision, if you want to, with your mates, is make a movie. Or at the very least, just write a movie script, make it, I don't know, funny, whatever you want to do, serious. Just sort of do the storyboard for it, do the script for it, call it Virginia, the beginning, or whatever you want. And include some of the bullet points or all of the bullet points there. Then do a little poster for the sequel of your movie, Virginia 2, The Lost Colony. Do whatever you need to. This sounds like maybe loads of work, but a bit of fun. Sometimes when revision, it can get a bit sort of boggy, can't it? At least this is a bit of fun with your mates. Make a little movie, and you'll remember it forever, actually, if nothing else, for the exam. And then really let us know. Send it in, pass it in. But at the very least, a little revision exercise would be to do a script or a storyboard for the main events of Virginia, beginning, middle, and end. Okay, so all things said, a bit of extra revisions from our textbooks that we use. Just pause the screen, look at the questions, and have a go at those checkpoints. And remember, as always, on our website at www.stchistory.com is all the rest of our online lessons and resources for you to revise from. And remember, on Google Classroom as well, if you have missed lessons, you'll generally have PowerPoint and these videos uploaded there. Okay, so once again, thank you very much. Hope this was useful, and we'll see you for the next lesson. Goodbye.